This is a tutorial on the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space Disclosure and Addendum CAR Form FHDS. And this is a two-page form that's required sometimes on some transactions, and I'll explain when it's required. And this form is the cause for a lot of confusion. It's just 2 pages. It's a lot to look at. Look at that. And then you scroll down here, and after the 2-page form, there's actually a defensible space decision tree, which is effectively a flowchart or infographic in text form to help a seller complete paragraph 3 of this FHDS form because it's so confusing. And if you look at this, actually, this decision tree, it gives step-by-step instructions, but this in itself is quite confusing. I mean, it is helpful, I guess. If you stick this form in front of a seller, they're going to get overwhelmed, period. You, as an agent, you really should help them out, give them some guidance by explaining how to do this form so it's not so overwhelming. Because when you put a disclosure in front of a seller's face and they think that they are legally liable if they make a mistake, an honest mistake, they're going to get frustrated. So we're not going to worry about this decision tree. If you want, reference it, but we don't need it because we're going to go through this 2-page form and simplify it. So let me scroll up to the top. All right, paragraph 1, section 1 is just applicability. When does this form apply? And it tells you there's 2 different things we're talking about here. Home fire hardening, which is preparation, and defensible space compliance. That's the buffer zone around the property. And it gives these conditions. When are you required to do this form? I'm going to break this down very simply for you. Now, it starts up here by saying there are 4 conditions. 1, does a property have 1 to 4 units? Okay, that's another way of saying, is it a residential property? All right. You're probably not doing this for raw land, but it doesn't apply. If you're doing this for residential property, it applies. It asks, is the seller required to complete a real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS? Okay. In general, the answer is yes. Generally speaking, every seller is required. Now, sometimes sellers aren't, but even in that case, those sellers should do it. I say all sellers should fill out a TDS. Just FYI, that's a whole separate topic, but take it from me, someone that's very compliance oriented, all sellers should do a TDS. All right. And then now it asks the important question. Is the property located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone? How do you find out? Well, the easy way is just go look at an NHD. Go look at a natural hazard disclosure. And there are 2 sections on an NHD. One is for wildland fire severity zone, and then the other is for a local fire hazard zone. If either of those are checked yes, then you need to do this form. Now, if you don't have the NHD for whatever reason, you can just go to this link right here, or even do a web search for a California fire hazard map. There's maps online that are easily accessible where you can type in a property address and it'll show you in this color-coded layer of red and orange and yellow if the property is in a high fire hazard risk. So it's pretty easy to find. So that's the important question. Now it also says, was a property built before January 1st, 2010? I say it doesn't matter. In fact, I'm going to simplify this so much for you. Now, it gives 4 conditions when this form is required up here, but down here it gives 3. It gives the same 4 as up here, but they don't ask if the property was built before 2010. Here's the thing. If the property was built after 2010 and you don't have to do this hardening disclosure, well, you still have to do this defensible space compliance, which is down here. It's all combined in one. So I'm going to simplify this whole mess here for you and tell you one simple thing, okay? If the property, I'm talking about residential property, if the residential property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, do this form. If it's not in a high or very high fire hazard zone, don't do this form. It's that simple. Just check. Is your property located in one of these zones? If it is, do it. If not, it's not required. There, we've simplified this whole paragraph. All you need to do as an agent or as a transaction coordinator is just check if the property is in a high zone. High, yes, no, then if it's not, no form. That's simple. Okay, now we move on to section 2. This is where the seller actually has to fill something out. Now, you stick it in front. Now, of course, this is presuming that the property is in a high fire hazard zone, because if it's not, you're not doing this form. This whole thing goes away. You don't have to worry about this. Now, for those of you that are still with me, because you have properties in high fire hazard zones, when you give this to the seller, it's going to ask all this. These are characteristics of the property that make it vulnerable to fires. And you're going to ask the seller. And a lot of sellers are going to look at this and say, I don't know. And that's okay. That answer is perfectly acceptable. If they say, I don't know, then the answer is no. Because it's not asking yes or no if it exists in a vacuum. If it exists and the seller doesn't know, it's asking, hey, seller, do you know if this exists? And the answer is either yes or no. Because if the seller can't say yes, the answer is no. So the seller's going to say to themselves, are these vulnerabilities applicable to my property? It's a simple question. They can read it out loud, and unless they say yes, yes, my roof is made of untreated wood shingles, or I have a shake roof, they put yes. If not, they put no. It's that simple. Sellers don't get in trouble for that which they don't know. They get in trouble for things that they know but withheld, concealed, or misrepresented. That's how a seller gets in trouble. All right. Seller can fill this out very easily if they just read it out loud and answer yes if the answer is yes. Now we move on here. Now this is the more confusing section. It's going to ask again, is the property subject to a local vegetation management ordinance? Okay, so this could be in the form of letters in the mail from the fire department, a county, some sort of county ordinance. Does the seller know? Does anyone know? Yes or no? So we check one of those boxes. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you do, then you write it. You check the box is. We move on. We don't get hung up on this. You either know it or you don't. It's that simple. Now, 3B. Okay, so if the seller's unaware, and they say it right here, then and the seller has not obtained a report from a defensible space inspector, and we'll talk about that in a second, you can just leave this alone. That's it. You don't have to do anything in 3B. All right? But if the seller has had to deal with something and they had some sort of report done recently, or the fire department came and did an inspection or something, then they're going to fill out one of these. Okay, let me give you a couple examples. Seller just had to deal with an issue, is totally savvy about this whole scenario because they got a letter from the fire department or a complaint, or the county came out and gave them a citation, and the seller had to hire people to come out and do weed trimming all around their property, and they got a report when it was done. The seller knows they can check this box. Or down here, the seller's been getting citations because their property poses a risk, and they've ignored it, and you're selling this place with all this deferred maintenance. But these aren't very common. Typically what we see is nothing's done here in 3B. That's it. So take this in a bite-sized piece. Is a seller unaware? Is the property in compliance because the seller had to do something recently? Is the property not in compliance? So most of the time you're just going to do nothing here in 3B. And we're going to move on to 3C. Once we get through the 3C, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. Bear with me here. So 3C, if you do nothing, just like we did for 3B, then it automatically defaults to this. That's the buyer's responsibility. There's no local ordinance, and buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible space law within 1 year close of escrow. So it's basically saying, listen, there's no local ordinance, and this is the buyer's problem now. The buyer owns it, new owner can deal with it. I'm walking away. That's it. And this is very commonly how this form is left. I'm not saying it always should be like that, but it's very commonly saying if there's no local ordinance known about, that you would just leave it alone and say, hey, there's no local ordinance. And the buyer can deal with any compliance issues in the future because they'll be the owner in the future. Doesn't that make sense? Goodbye. Now, The exception to this is when there is an ordinance in effect. Now, if you want, you can dig into it and look up if there's a local ordinance. And if you go to this website, let me pull it over here real quick. This Defensible Space website. This is the fire.ca.gov. You can see up to here, okay? And it has some links to like different county sites: LA, Orange County, Ventura County, Marin County. And you can look that up if you want. And you can even, if you're concerned about it, you can request a real estate defensible space inspection. And I think they're like $118. And the seller can have someone come out and do an inspection where we check we just click the box, and it tells you if you reside in these counties. It gives you some links. It gives you a link to the map, and this is where you can order the inspection for $118. And this should be done if there's a local ordinance. It might be worth spending 30 seconds, a whole 30 seconds, going to the link that's up here, right there, and just checking if there's a local ordinance. Now, if there's a local ordinance in effect, you can still say it's a buyer's responsibility, right there, and that it's a point of now presuming it's a point of sale requirement. The other is that C2 is referring to a point of sale requirement, meaning this must be addressed prior to close of escrow. This is not as common as people leaving it as C1 where you do nothing, or people just going to C3. The difference is that there's a local vegetation management ordinance in effect, but it's not a requirement it's not a point of sale requirement. And so it's saying the buyer's going to deal with it. I'm a fan of the buyer dealing with it, if you can't tell yet, because unless it's a point of sale requirement, then the seller should order the inspection. And if there's a local ordinance that says, hey, the seller, just like the seller might order a termite, hey, the seller should get a defensible space inspection and send it to the buyer. And if the seller is at risk, hey, spend $118 on the sale. I mean, this is an insignificant amount of money to have an inspector come out. But if that's an area of concern, have the seller do it. But if not, it's simple. If there's not a concern and there is, so up here, there's no local ordinance, right? Ideally, there's no local ordinance. We don't have to worry about this. But if there is, you can still say buyer responsibility because there is an ordinance, but there's no requirement at the point of sale. So it's the buyer's problem to deal with after the fact. That's it. That's it. Now, there could be a local ordinance that says it's a seller's problem. And you can look that up on this site over here. This Cal Fire, this one. Up here at the top. fire.ca.gov. But what I'm saying, and this is perhaps a bit long-winded way of saying it, is it all stems back to whether or not there's a local ordinance. And you can just go to that website and you can look it up, and you saw how it said Marin County, Orange County, Los Angeles County. And you can look it up if you want, or the seller may know. And if there's no local ordinance, you can leave it like this. And if there is a local ordinance, but the local ordinance doesn't require the seller to do anything, then just check this box right here. And if there's a local ordinance that requires someone to do something and you want to put on the buyer, check this box. Or if the seller's going to take care of it, check this box. And what you're most commonly going to see is C1, left alone, or C3. And if not, if there's a point of sale requirement from the local ordinance, you just choose. Is it the buyer's responsibility or the seller's responsibility? And you check one of those boxes. Hopefully that makes sense. If you play the last 20 seconds over again, that should explain succinctly how to complete this section. Now, if the seller went through some nightmare where they got a violation and had to have someone come out and deal with some huge local ordinance requirement, they'll already know about it, and they'll know that they already completed whatever they had to do, and it was some big headache where they I had a neighbor have to deal with this once, and he had acreage, and he had to hire a team of people to come out with weed trimmers. They'll know, and they'll check this box, but this is very rare. Most of the time, it's going to be C1 or C3, and if there's a point of sale requirement, it's going to be one of these two, depending on who's going to deal with the responsibility. Now, if there was documentation already obtained, then you can. Oh, actually, this is the link where the information can be sourced. This is almost always left blank, right here. If the seller has the defensible space inspection, just submit it, and they check this box, or just leave it blank. I wouldn't even check this box on here. Or seller does not have a copy, and the buyer may obtain a copy at. This is rarely used. This would be if there was a report the seller didn't have possession, but there was a way to contact an inspector or something. But if the seller does have an inspection in hand, check this box, give it to the seller, give it to the buyer. Okay, hopefully we've boiled this thing down to a point where you don't need to go through the decision tree. If you have any questions, please leave a comment so I can answer them publicly. Thank you for watching.